This is Alex Wood with the Journal Enquirer. I'm here in Vernon with Chris Hall, who had responded to a request I put out on Facebook for thoughts about the future with some real interesting kind of large picture thoughts about how COVID-19 may affect the way we do things and who we are in the future. And so I'm just asking him to share some of those thoughts for the camera if he's okay with that.
All right. Well, several months ago, I came across a podcast, and whenever I find a new podcast, I go back to the very first episodes. And it happened the first episodes were around October 2001, right after 9/11. And I don't know if you remember, but back in those days, we're all trying to process what happened in 9/11. And it got me thinking that we really changed in 9/11. This country has changed. And it made me think about COVID-19 and the pandemic and how are we going to be changing from this? I'm sure that we're going to be changing quite a bit from what happened this year in 2020. But I think it's going to be a while. It's going to be a couple of years before we can look back and say, oh, that's how we've changed. But you see a whole bunch of things happening. I mean, just working from home all the time and not seeing your coworkers in person anymore. Not being able to see your family. I haven't seen my family since the spring back in Long Island. And shortages of various foods in the food store and all that. And I know that when we come out of this, we're going to be different from when we came in. I don't really know what that's going to be like. And quite frankly, with the way 2020 has been, it's hard to be optimistic about change. Although, when you think of it, after 9/11 and after everything that's happened, we still managed to move on as a country and still live on. And I'm sure after this is all past us, we're gonna live on and move on. So I know technically you should be optimistic about things are gonna change, and whether it's for good or for better, we're still gonna keep on going. But it's just so funny. It's just this year has been so crazy that it's hard to have that optimism.
Yeah, in terms of you mentioning the parallel to 9/11, one of the things that crosses my mind is how people are talking about how the death rates these days we're running at about the rate of about 9/11 a day, and yet it doesn't seem to have quite as significant effect, I guess, because it's not as visible. It's happening off in hospitals, and it's not violent. It's disease, but it is very odd that what a different order of magnitude it is, and how the effects, while they're really significant, after 9/11, I felt like I'd been hit in the gut, and I don't quite feel that way about this.
It's an abstraction when you think about it. I mean, I first heard about it online through social media, and it was just numbers on that point. It took a while before people close to me started getting COVID-19. I mean, I think around Thanksgiving is when my cousin got and thankfully recovered from COVID-19, and then a friend of mine got it a few weeks ago. And I think for a lot of people, even though the number of people that have gotten it is phenomenal in this country, we're still a large country. I think there's a lot of people that just don't know anyone directly that has had it. Or the fact that we're so isolated at this point, we don't get to see things up close. And so I think in some ways it's still an abstraction for a lot of people, which is crazy. And it's funny, it's here in Vernon, within the last week or so, there was a pretty terrible fire down in downtown Rockville. 7 people injured. And the entire community, it seems, is mobilizing to reach out for support. There's a couple of donation bins around town. But in my mind, I don't see that same sort of mobilization, that same sort of motivation in response to COVID-19. I wonder if it's because something like that fire is much more closer to home than something that started in China and then went through Europe and then finally came here. But it's not here in Connecticut. It was more in New York City at first, and even though the numbers up here have been going up tremendously, it's still, I don't know. I wonder if it's just, like I said, an abstraction. It's not really concrete for us, which is a shame.
Yeah. Well, I thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. Really appreciate it, and all the best.